few weeks ago, in the middle of the transfer window, I was given some information which I was unqualified to verify. The information was that West Ham United had paid off £55 million of a £120 million loan facility which we'd taken out in March 2021. Now, you may well remember the story. It was from MSD Capital, who's Michael Dell, the computer guy. Basically, we were one of 5 Premier League clubs to take out a loan facility to try and offset some of the losses that had happened during COVID. I didn't pay too much attention to the story at the time. Not that I didn't believe it, but number one, I couldn't verify it. I'm not somebody that understands how these financial things work at all. But number two, it sort of made sense. We had just sort of recently agreed to trouser £105 million from Arsenal for Declan Rice. So it sort of made a little bit of sense that maybe West Ham would pay off some of their debt with what was basically 100% profit transfer, bearing in mind Declan Rice hadn't cost us anything. So I sort of dismissed it. It made sense to me. You've got to remember, at that time, I wasn't armed with the information that we were going to go on and sign the players that we have signed in the window that's just closed. I didn't think that much more of it. However, rumours continue to persist about people at West Ham, directors, be it Trip Smith, Terry Brown and some other directors there, being readying themselves to sell their shares. The West Ham might be ripe for a takeover. Now, West Ham have been ripe for a takeover for quite some time, since the embarrassment clause on the stadium finished. That's no news to anybody. What we understand has put a bit of a spanner in the works has been obviously David Gold's unfortunate passing, and of course sadly his daughter Vanessa Gold, and it's meant the Gold family shares have gone into probate, which makes it very, very difficult for there to be a takeover until that's resolved. However, you hear on the grapevine that things are starting to move in that direction. They also added to the fact that Tim Steidten gets appointed. Now, a lot of people say that Tim Steidten's appointment has nothing to do with David Sullivan. And again, sometimes I do actually believe that myself, but it is an easy one to dismiss because it's easy to believe that Sullivan wouldn't. You know, it's easy to cast Sullivan as the bad guy. And I think sometimes when you do that, you might miss the obvious. But I think Sullivan spent so many years in football, why would he suddenly decide to implement a director of football now? I know he had Huselos there before, but he wasn't really a football director, not in the same sense that Steidten is certainly. So the rumour and the suggestion was that Tim Steidten had been put into place by whoever wants to buy the club next. Now it's all bubbled up and surfaced up again with the news that both Jim Ratcliffe, but it's Jim Ratcliffe, and of course the Qatari bidders are now out of the bidding for Manchester United, and they're quite cross about it as far as you can tell. Apparently the Glazers have strung these people along for a long time and said that they've put a deadline on the bidding, and they've extended the deadline on the bidding. They've made both parties tender serious documents in terms of what they plan to do with Manchester United, and they've got to move the goalposts at the end. The price was apparently $5 billion. Now they've said actually no, it's $10 billion. Apparently both Jim Ratcliffe and the Qataris have pulled out, and they're looking for a different Premier League club, which puts West Ham firmly and squarely in the crosshairs. That's no news at all, by the way, because it was always speculated that whoever didn't get Manchester United might well be interested in buying West Ham United. Okay, so again, this is a little bit tenuous and it's a little bit boring, but stick with me on this one. So, armed with that information yesterday, I thought I'm going to go and check out this paying off of the debt. And when I went and looked at it, it appears that it may well be true. Now, you may remember this story. Now, it's from MSD Capital. MSD Capital were a company, as I said, that had a loan facility of £120 million available to West Ham United that we could pay off. We could borrow. It's basically like a credit limit. West Ham could use it, could borrow it, and interest was payable at 9%. Now, we didn't use all 120 million of it, but apparently we did use 55 million of it. And we had to pay off a short-term loan from media rights funding. And also there was a loan taken from Barclays, which had to be paid off in July of 2021. We used that money, so we used it, and that debt remained outstanding. We weren't actually paying the debt off. It was like a credit card. We were making minimum payments of it. Apparently, we've paid that debt off now. I cannot verify this. I'd be very, very interested if anybody can. As I say, I'm not a guy that understands all the financial markets. However, when you start to look at it, you think, well, okay, this is very, very interesting. And now you get to the point where you look at the people that might be interested in buying West Ham. And now you think, my word, we must be a very, very attractive proposition, taking into account the stadium. Now, the stadium is really important because I'd always assumed that because of the stadium, we would be unattractive because basically we didn't own our own ground. However, there's one thing we do know. The stadium can be negotiated for, and the reason we know that is because Pi Capital did it. Do you remember? Pi Capital were the firm that wanted to take over. They got Rio Ferdinand involved. They got Tony Cottee involved. They wanted to take over West Ham. It was doomed to failure anyway, because little did they know at the time that David Sullivan and David Gold had already got an agreement with Daniel Kretinsky. However, Pi Capital didn't know that, so Pi Capital jumped through a load of hoops. They asked to do their due diligence on West Ham. I think West Ham did not want to pass them the account, certainly not for a second look anyway. But they had enough encouragement that they went and approached the LLDC, who negotiated with them. So they had apparently, Pi Capital, reached an agreement for the stadium. Now that's absolutely amazing. If you don't believe anything else, that much is true. That tells us something. That tells us that the stadium, in whatever guise, which is basically, that's an arm's length management organisation of the stadium. But that stadium is up. I don't know to what extent, whether it's sale or whether it's tender or whether it's long-term lease. I don't know how that would work. I don't know, but there's a negotiation there to be had. Now, there is something that would also obviously stop that happening. That is, apparently any public building must go out to public tender if it's going to be sold. So I don't think you can just offer it to whoever is going to buy West Ham, but it is interesting. What I would say is that land has no interest to anybody that doesn't own West Ham, because West Ham have got a 99-year lease. Obviously not 99 years anymore, but there's no use to anybody else because basically football has to be played on it. It's only going to be any use to somebody that wants to buy West Ham, buy the land, because they're going to have to make sure that there's a football ground on it. And that's really it. So this is interesting because when you start piecing it all together, I also heard from somebody completely different a few days ago that the LLDC were having talks with somebody interested in buying West Ham. 3 different stories, all individually, don't mean an awful lot. However, when you put them all together, you think, well, hold on, have West Ham paid off some debt? Have West Ham paid off this MSD loan facility, which is basically paying off 55 million? Apparently so. Are the LLDC, have they spoken and have they met with somebody that wants to take over West Ham? Apparently so. Is the embarrassment clause ended in terms of West Ham can sell without any punishment, without any compensation due to the LLDC or the Mayor's office, call it what you will? That much is true as well. The only thing they're waiting on is probate. Now, this is private stuff. There'd be no reason why you and I would know what would happen. It's private business, isn't it? Private family business, even though you're dealing with shares of West Ham Football Club. That's not going to be released into the public domain. I'm pretty sure about that. But it may well be that they've come to close to some resolution with that. I just found it really, really interesting that all these 3 stories happened at the same time. And then you add to that the fact, the story. I don't know that it's a fact, but it's pretty much widely out there, that both the Qatari and Sir Jim Ratcliffe have pulled out of the race for Manchester United. Now, I'm not absolutely certain that both of those parties are looking for a Premier League club. Let me just say that. As I understand it, Jim Ratcliffe's a big Manchester United fan. They're both rich. You know, you're dealing with a couple of very, very rich entities there. I'd say one of them's an entity and one of them's an individual. And I think certainly with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, why would he bother? You know, rich man, had the chance to own the club that he supported. Why would he go and buy West Ham? I can't see any reason why he would if there's some desperate It doesn't seem like there's a desperate need for him to own a Premier League football club. Any Premier League football club will do. No, I think he wanted to own Manchester United. If that's the team he supports, you can sort of understand it, wouldn't you? You know what I mean? The culmination of a lifetime dream, probably. That I can understand. The Qatari one's very, very different. As we know, the Qatari one is all about future investments, and a lot of it is going to be to do with real estate. A lot of it is to do with increasing their profile and possibly for them to get a foothold in the English game, which I think would be sensible. There's a lot going on in Saudi at the moment, in terms of Saudi are building up their own professional league. I'm now looking at some of the other leagues across Europe, and I think they're paling in significance in terms of their spending money, in terms of the Premier League. The Premier League's television money and everything else is making it really difficult, I think, for anybody else to compete. And I can absolutely see the allure of a Qatari takeover as far as they're concerned. So I do find it very, very interesting. Watch this space. I can't tell you what's going to happen. I don't know enough about it. But I did think altogether these three stories were really, really interesting and put together with the Man United one. Maybe something's happening. Wouldn't put any money on it. I don't know, but there's been a lot of deals going around with Daniel Kretinsky at the moment. So I feel it in my bones, feel it in my water. Something's happening with West Ham at the moment. I really do think so. And yeah, watch this space, I guess, because I tell you what, if you were an investor and you were looking at the Premier League now, and West Ham are doing remarkably well in the Premier League. I know sometimes we're so invested in terms of the individual stories. It's easy to get annoyed with whatever, be it David Moyes or anything else. But from the outside looking in, West Ham have just won a European trophy. We've been 3 years in a row being in Europe. We're up near the top of the league at the moment. Whopping great stadium. Yeah, I know, I know that it's too far away from the pitch and all the rest of it. But again, outside looking in, you've got to remember a lot of people on the continent don't care about running tracks and things like that. There's loads of clubs on the continent that have that. They don't care. Well, PSG. Exactly that situation, weren't they? So this is the things that sort of might piss you and I off are not necessarily the things that are going to deter an investor looking at buying West Ham. And you look at it and you look, well, if Man United aren't for sale, you're not going to buy Arsenal at the moment. You can't buy Manchester City. You can't buy Newcastle. You look at West Ham and you look at the clubs up the top and you think, well, actually, West Ham are probably the most purchasable of the clubs that are up and around that area. So anyway, there you go. Just my thoughts. Be interested to know what you think. Watch this space. West Ham for takeover. Who knows?